everybody. Welcome to our panel discussion for Under Soviet Skies. It's our film festival that we're co-hosting here at the Armenian Institute with Klassiki from 25th of May, which was this Tuesday, until June 1st. So make sure that you register for a film pass and you check out all of the films before you have to get a Klassiki subscription to view them. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We are going to be joined by 4 wonderful panelists and a great moderator to discuss Soviet identity and film and a bunch of other exciting things that have kind of come up in conversation as we've been watching these films and having these conversations during our festival this week. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording, so if you don't want your video on, please do turn it off. We're also live streaming on Facebook, so please feel free to share comments, thoughts, and opinions in both the Zoom chat and on our Facebook Live, and we'll be monitoring both of them. We'd love to hear your thoughts, and if you've watched any of the films, please tell us what you thought about them. We've also got a little poll on our website, on our Facebook page at the moment, where you can rate which film you liked the most. So do go and check it out. All of the information will be on our website, on the Klassiki website, and on our Facebook page. My name is Olivia Malkonyan. I'm from Armenian Institute, and I'm going to pass you over to our director, Tatovik Ayvazyan, who will introduce you to each of the panelists. And again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Olivia, and good evening, everyone. Bariereko, dobry večer, and I will not dare to pronounce it in Georgian. If you are not in London, I have to tell you it's the first warm day after about 10 months of winter, so we're all a bit overexcited, so excuse Londoners today. It's been also long winter for Armenia because of a devastating war, and even today it's a very tense situation in Armenia, and we need art and beauty in our lives more than ever. And it's been a difficult year for everyone because of the pandemic, and all of us reached out for films, apparently, for distraction, for comfort, for joy and entertainment. And this is why our festival films are very varied. We talked about having a theme and decided to have 5 very different films. Some of them, I hope there's something for everyone. We have everything from political satire to tender rom-coms and Oscar winners. We, Armenian Institute, is a recipient of Heritage Lottery Grant, and one of our themes is historic neighbors. And this year we're focusing on our Soviet neighbors. And who else to represent Soviet neighbors, if not Klassiki, which is a new fantastic streaming platform for newly restored and subtitled Soviet, Russian films from Caucasus and Central Asia. I hope you have already visited their website. If no, please do, and subscribe and enjoy their films. And I'd like to invite Talita Pigat, their platform director, to say a few words about Klassiki platform.
Thank you, Tatovik, for the introduction, and thank you in general to the Armenian Institute for partnering with us together on this festival. To begin a little bit about ourselves, Klassiki briefly, we are an online streaming platform that streams classic and contemporary cinema from Russia, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. Kino Klassika is our parent charity, and we have regular cinema programming, which we then adapted to free online screenings over lockdown, where the platform was then born out of a need to continue to make these films as accessible as possible to UK audiences. The platform is highly curated, boutique-sized, and we have a permanent collection of classics as well as contemporary rotating pick-of-the-week films. They come with English subtitles, important contextualizing in program notes, essays, and live introductions with directors when possible. For us recently, it's been such a real delight to bring Armenian cinema to the platform and to build up our collection, working with the National Cinema Center of Armenia. And our most recent edition, Hello, It's Me, we saw launch the festival on Tuesday and is still available to screen. So I urge you to go watch this incredible film. For myself personally, being of Armenian descent, it's been an interesting wonder to explore and discover the treasure trove of Armenian cinema that's out there with my family as well. I think that the films chosen in the season are fantastic representations of their region. If I had to speak to a favorite, A Piece of Sky, I'm so happy is being spotlit. It has the pleasure of being such a universal storyline of a misunderstood Black sheep in a traditional village, but then uses a language and culture that, you know, for me, for the longest time, felt like it only existed in my home with my family. So to see this on screen is special. And I think it speaks to the importance of making these films subbed and accessible to audiences, both diaspora and film lovers in the UK. But anyway, I look forward to hearing this be discussed in more depth during the panel. And thank you again to the Armenian Institute for all that you do and for spotlighting what we do at Klassiki. And all the films discussed are available on Klassiki, and I hope that you continue to explore the other films on offer from Armenia and the neighboring countries on the platform. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Talitha. It's a pleasure to work with you, and I know how much you love The Piece of Sky. You've been saying it since you watched it. It's so beautiful. It's tender. It's funny. I hope it's a favorite for many of our viewers. And now to the fun part. After the introductions are over, I'd like to introduce you to our fabulous panelists. I'd like to start with Nuritsa Matosyan, our own Armenian Institute's Nuritsa, who is a writer, actor, broadcaster, and human rights activist, and a very supportive member of Armenian Institute's advisory committee. Nuritsa writes on arts, contemporary music, history, and Armenia. She published first biography and critical study of Greek composer Yannis Xenakis and the groundbreaking biography Black Angel, A Life of Arshil Gorky in 1998. Nuritsa regularly broadcasts on BBC, contributes to newspapers and magazines, The Independent, The Guardian, The Economist, The Observer. She has also shot, directed, and produced Heart of Two Nations, Seranding, on her conversation with the Armenian newspaper editor who was murdered in Istanbul. Our next panelist is Ian Christie, who just joined us, sort of literally and metaphorically running from another panel on early British cinema, I think, Ian, if I'm right. He's a British film scholar, author, and current professor of film and media history at Birkbeck, and fellow of British Academy. Ian has researched and published on many aspects of film history, including Eisenstein and Russian cinema, Powell and Pressburger, Gilliam and Scorsese, and is a regular broadcaster on cinema. Dr. Maria Karalkova, I'm trying to find that spotlight you, Maria. Here you are. We're so happy you could join us, who is an interdisciplinary researcher and curator. She has studied screen media and cultures at the University of Cambridge, gaining her doctorate degree at Oxford and specializing in Russian cinema. She worked in so many creative industries and done so many things, Maria. I don't think even I can list all of it. As a producer, journalist, broadcaster, script editor at Moss Film Studio, BBC, Sony Pictures, etc., etc. And Maria has curated many public events at Barbican and Centre Pompidou in Paris. And last but not least, of course, is Gareth Evans, writer, editor, film and event producer, and who is now Whitechapel Gallery's moving image curator. Gareth, I have to say, it's the most fabulous title, moving image curator. And Gareth has a special connection to especially Armenian cinema and culture, and he co-curated UK's first Armenian Film Festival in 2005. And he's been also on a jury of Golden Apricot of International Film Festival, and I think he has quite deep interest and connection to Armenian film and history in general. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and not having a beer in a pub, which is a very tempting prospect this evening. And what I want to do, quickly go around and just ask what's everyone's connection to Soviet cinema and film. What do you love about it? What's so special about it? Shall we start with you, Noritsa?
I must say that I've really enjoyed watching the films that have been listed and have been screened. And particularly, of course, my great favorite is Parajanov, Shadows of Our Forgotten Ancestors, which I'd like to talk about. But I had for me, the great discovery were two actually, and also the contrasting Burned by the Sun, the Russian film by Mikhailovsky, and Hello, It's Me. I had seen the others before, not the Georgian film. And I'm very struck by the contrast between these films, their approach, the way that they were made, the subjects, the qualities, and somehow the way that they plunge you into an era that seems to be long gone. Okay, it was a century ago almost. So I've learned a lot from watching them, and I found them also very moving. And I think this is a time when for me, it's during this pandemic, it's been a time when I've liked watching older films because I have this need to see the past, and I've been able to do so with these films.
Thank you, Noritsa. Maria, what about you?
If to answer your question, kind of my connection to Soviet film is probably natural. I grew up in it, but also when I moved to the UK 13 years ago, I really enjoyed watching how Soviet film, which used to be something quite limited in terms of access and in terms of, special access to the mass audience, gradually kind of spread over first kind of some kind of elitist small circles, but then widely in London and in the UK, and talking to, again, all spheres of life. First of all, in academia, it's gradually merged into academic curriculum, not just in Russian or Slavic studies, but again, I teach on film studies in general, and I introduce more and more, not just, again, Russian, Soviet, Armenian, or even, Tajik, all sort of Soviet Republic films to the curriculum. And I'm so excited to see my students' reaction to it, so fresh, and they're really discovering it, because again, here, even kind of Chinese or Asian cultures and filmmaking is more widely accessible and known than the Soviet, and especially the films that we kind of present today from not just Russian, but a broader Soviet background. So that is kind of my reflection and fascination, not just by the Soviet film, which I know and was introduced as a young person when I was growing up, but also the way it is now merging into the UK culture and international culture in general. And we can speak of more references, even in small talks and things like that, and people recognize more names than just Eisenstein, although it was, again, something that I know Ian was a part of, and Kino Klassiki in general, like introducing more of Eisenstein with again, with several exhibitions and festivals about two UK and London audiences, and not saying that it's just Battleship Potemkin. It's the same with Vertif. It's not just Man with the Movie Camera. It's many more films, and it's coming into London cultural scene, and I'm really excited that it's being regarded as something, again, I think it's a bit of a stereotype, but it's still there in a very good way, that Russia culture is still, Soviet culture and all this is still something, brings you culture, brings you more experience and kind of joy as well. So this is kind of my connection to Soviet films in general, and the way they're perceived here, and I think which is very much kind of echoes the mission of this festival.
Thank you so much. I think we'll have a chance to talk about all these shared identities and how films reflect this. Ian, you were nodding enthusiastically when Maria was talking about Russian film being more than Battleship Potemkin or Odessa Steps. Tell us about your connection, because obviously you're an expert on British cinema, but where the love of Soviet cinema in Russia comes.
Well, I kind of accidentally got involved with Russian cinema in the Soviet era. And actually, if you can see up there behind my head, there's a great long frieze up near the top. That is a blow up of a drawing that Sergei Eisenstein did in 1915. It's a bread queue in Petrograd. And he did it on a very small strip of paper. We did a blow up of it for an exhibition that I did with Grad Gallery back in 2016, because nobody could see it. But he writes on it, you know, there are over 100 figures in this drawing. And he was a kid in Petrograd during World War I. I got involved with Soviet cinema at the end of the 70s, during the 80s. And I was lucky enough in what turned out to be the last years of the Soviet regime, Soviet era, to travel frequently, almost every year, to the USSR. And one of the interesting things, so many interesting things about it, was that it was a rule in the Soviet times that you couldn't just visit Moscow or Leningrad, you had to be sent to another republic. And I was sent to Armenia, the Soviet Armenia, in, I think, 83. I knew very little about it. I was just put on a plane with my KGB minder, of course, and shipped off to Yerevan and spent 3 or 4 days, I forget exactly how long, really seeing Yerevan, completely fresh eyes. We went to the studio, the Armen Film Studio, and I met Henrik Malyan, for instance, who was the most famous director at that time. And I actually sat in on a conversation between the studio people in Yerevan and Goskino in Moscow, arguing over the budget for a new Armenian film. Because a very interesting feature of the Soviet system, which is often, I think, forgotten nowadays, is that the Soviet cinema was very proud of its multinational constitution. And if you were ever organizing a program of new Soviet film, you were always encouraged to make sure you show a film from one of the republics. Make sure you show a Georgian film, or a film from somewhere other than Moscow or Leningrad, because they were proud of it. They felt it was a multinational cinema. And it was really interesting to see this from the perspective of being actually in one of the republics, it being in Armenia. On another occasion, I went to Azerbaijan, and I was lucky enough to take people like Derek Jarman and Sally Potter on a trip to see again how the world looked from Baku, as well as how it looked in Moscow. And I think it benefited the cinema of the republics. The cinemas of the Soviet republics benefited enormously from being, in a way, from being under the umbrella of the Soviet film system. A huge amount of money was pumped into promoting these films and circulating them. And actually, all the independent states that have resulted after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they face an uphill struggle, really, to get their films seen and known. And that's a problem I've discussed with people, working from Ukraine and Kazakhstan and many other nations now, that there were advantages to the Soviet system. There were terrible, terrible disadvantages, but there were also benefits in terms of the propulsion that went into projecting this image of a complete multinational cinema, which is really how the Soviets thought of it, I think. And of course, some great films were made, wonderful, wonderful films. If you fell victim to the system, like poor Parajanov, of course, it was terrible. But at the same time, I have to say that probably Parajanov's name would not have become known to the outside world. his fate wouldn't have become known had he not made his name with Shadows of Our Forgotten Ancestors. And it was the Soviet system that, for better and worse, brought that film to a global audience. So I kind of look back with a double perspective. I'm interested in what's happening in the different ex-Soviet states in their production today. I think it's fascinating. We're seeing such a variety, such difference, expressions of national character. But I also feel slightly nostalgic for the days when it was one big multinational cinema. And there's still a lot to learn from that.
Thank you. And I agree. I had this nostalgia when I was rewatching Hello, It's Me, because Frances Dovlatan has this amazing cast of Russian, Armenian, from all over Soviet Union. It's dubbed in Armenian beautifully, the film, and you have this gorgeous Russian actor. Suddenly everyone speaks in perfect Armenian, and thanks to Klassiki now we can watch the subtitled version. And Garrett, tell us about your love and connection to Armenian and Soviet cinema in general.
Yeah, well, thank you, Tatevik, and thanks to everyone at Klassiki, of course, and the Armenian Institute for making this possible. I mean, I think it's interesting that Ian mentioned the 80s, of course, where he was traveling in person to the Soviet Union and to Armenia. For me, the 80s was when I started first to see Soviet films on television. I was fortunate enough then. Now it seems like a lost world to be able to see world cinema pretty much at peak time on the BBC, on BBC Two, on weekend evenings, and Channel 4. To see some of the great Russian films and films, of course, from across the republics. And I didn't really have a sense of how they all joined up in a kind of ecological way, in a sort of constellation of relationships. But I was absolutely overwhelmed by them. They almost defined what I thought the possibilities of cinema were for me at the time, and remain indelibly kind of imprinted on my early film-going imagination. They just knocked, the kind of plodding, theatrical, tired narrative cinema of Britain and America, the films that I'd up until that point seen anyway, completely for six, when we had this idea of the individual operating within a larger collective structure, the tensions, of course, that come in that relationship, but also, crucially, the cinematic skill with which these amazing stories were being delivered. The mise-en-scène of this cinema was outstanding, and it taught us about what words that are too loosely applied cinematically, words like visionary, really mean when applied with the full apparatus of the kind of imagination of the incredible teams behind them. So it really was the kind of the foundational landscape on which I built my sense of what the possibilities of cinema could be, and it remains so in a very real sense. I mean, those great directors, of the various golden ages that we might think about, but also, many other, smaller films, one-off films that you realize joined up the dots behind the scenes, perhaps more than with, a great flag waving or a sort of a blazing promotional attitude, but equally, of course, important and in many ways, as richly rewarding. So it was through television, and then when I was starting to go to the cinema that I discovered the riches of this territory.
That's amazing. Thank you. Which, Garrett, brings me to the question I wanted to talk to you about. While you're saying in the 80s it looked amazing and visionary, what's the situation now? Why a British audience should watch this film? What's the relevance?
Well, I mean, obviously the film's chosen for this season. It's great that it's happening, and it's great that Klassiki exists, full stop, as a really carefully curated and, crucially modestly scaled platform, I think, where it's possible to get a full sense, of the intentions of the platform, but also the landscape of the cinema that it's advocating. Too often, we're overwhelmed by apparent choice, where when we realize if we dig deeper into other platforms, there's very little genuine choice. It's just versions of a similar kind of thing on a huge numerical scale. With Klassiki, of course, we see a deep understanding of how these connections are being made historically and in contemporary cinema as well. There's an understanding of the people and the territories involved. So no, I mean, there's no question why these films from these territories should be seen. I think particularly because there's that tension that Ian has already identified between the larger kind of multinational trans-territorial identity of the Soviet Union, which held these Republican cinemas, you know, in a grip if you were experiencing things negatively, but supported them if you were in a positive relationship at a certain point, gives that you know, transcontinental cinema, you know, a promotional position, an ideological position, of course, in some ways, but a creative position in world cinema that is really unmatched, I would argue, you know, across the various national cinemas and even continental cinemas that we know. But it's particularly, for me, the interest, I think, lies in that relationship, that tension between, you know, national cinemas at a Republican level and that larger Soviet structure, which, of course, you know, remains in kind of echo and ripple after the formal dissolution, and many you know, people, crew members and actors still working, of course, in contemporary cinemas across the region. And with many younger filmmakers coming up, you know, without direct experience of that larger industrial model. But I think the tension still remains, the creative tension between the distinction of regional identities and of national identities, and then a larger kind of internationalist position that the Soviet Union, of course, and Soviet cinema believed in and hugely supported and circulated. You know, if I think of a friend I'm sure of many of us, Mihaly Modi at Second Run DVD, who is very, very supportive, of course, of Soviet cinemas and the larger ripple of Eastern European and Caucasian filmmaking. You know, he grew up in India in the 40s, 50s and 60s, and he saw these films as his, you know, his Saturday cinema going. When I was watching, you know, idiotic, you know, British children's comedies, so-called, you know, he would be going to cinemas and seeing this great run of incredible films because of obviously the political and cultural and social economic links between India and the Soviet Union. So he would grow up on those. He would then come to the UK in the late 60s, starting his career as he saw it then in accountancy, very quickly get diverted into the music industry. He was literally had his accountancy office just around the corner from Abbey Road Studio. So clearly there was some sound coming out of there that excited him a bit more than the spreadsheet in front of him. He goes through the music industry, and then, of course, when he gets into a position to do so, launches a label which celebrates this cinema arguably more than any other cinema. And so in that sense, you know, we understand how the impact of this was a global one. It was not only, of course, a territorial one. It rippled globally and cast really deep roots into people's consciousness. But I think the tension there is between these smaller cinemas, shall we say, and the larger family. And I think on the thresholds between the two is where we see some of the most exciting action. This season, of course, is a great example of that. Parajanov is a wonderful exemplar of a number of identities operating within his filmmaking practice. You know, different regions and countries claiming him at certain points. Of course, it's very important that we remember that his outstanding house museum is in Yerevan, and that is the mothership, of course, of his locational identity. But I think it's on that border, if you like, between these various claims to identity, but to belonging, and most importantly to place, in a way, that we find this ongoing excitement. And this remains absolutely the case, you know, up to the present. I mean, the Klassiki lineup, the library lineup, and the films running in the previous incarnation are testimony to this. You know, it's significant that a platform like this has emerged, I think, at this time when, as Ian said, we're at the point where a certain kind of experiential memory is changing, is fading in lots of cases. And so the need for reclamation and recovery is obviously always important. But at the same time, that's not just for those people who had a sense of it and would like to revisit it, but actually for people making now, for viewers, audiences like myself, you know, to remember and to be reminded of and to learn in lots of cases about the earlier traditions that have informed and underpinned, you know, what is obviously now an ongoing national cinema across many, many different countries.
Thank you, Gareth. Very interesting point of view. It's just fascinating for me because I grew up in Soviet Armenia and I have a very sort of almost insider's view of the thing. It's fascinating to hear how a British curator would see it. And of course, what's the famous quote from Parajanov about being an Armenian, born in Tiflis, sitting in a Russian prison for being a Ukrainian nationalist. So this is Soviet identity in one sentence. And I hope we'll hear more about Parajanov from Nuritsa later on. But Maria, wanted to ask you, because we talked to you a bit about shared identities. And of course, a Soviet identity, Soviet cinema is such a wide and complex idea. How do we even present it? Because a lot of people talking to me about this festival use Russian and Soviet words interchangeably. And I've been watching some of the Central Asian films on Klassiki platform, and they're so distinct and they're so different from, let's say, Georgian cinema or Ukrainian cinema. There's huge diversity, and of course they're joined together as well by a common theme.
Absolutely. Thanks for the question, Tatevik. And actually, I think I'll have two parts of my answer. And then the first one, I'd like to also continue kind of cross-reference the quote that you just made from Parajanov. There's a quote from Hello, It's Me, which I actually recently just watched during the weekend, where one of the protagonists says, there's no need to be a nationalist, you just need to be a good Armenian. I'm Russian, but a son of Armenian people. So, and I quite, this quote kind of struck to me because, again, the way, because when you ask, how do we present Sovietness today? And then Gareth was talking a lot about, tension that that exists, within this multi-transnational cultures and cinemas, and of course politics, because we can't get away from politics, and especially today when we, look at the news connected to all these post-Soviet countries. But at the same time, I'm really pleased with the way you curated this season, which is completely not about tension, but it's about uniting things together and showcasing them together for and giving the agency to the viewer who is, again, maybe coming from any background, not necessarily one of the republics that we represent, just throwing this to the 5 beautiful films and letting the viewer see the connections, cross influences and reflections. And when presenting under the idea of Sovietness, I think that was a really, really good step for you as a curator. I'm really also quite like the title. I'm not sure, how did you come up with that? If that is called something Under Soviet Skies, because I think that's, quite nicely changes this register from, territorial attitude and borders and tension towards, the skies that is something that unites and is quite, like an umbrella term and free and kind of welcoming of any kind of influences. So there is a kind of one side of exploring the identities, not through tension and not through like the other, but through, similar things. I'm both I'm all of these things, and that all unites in me, as Parajanov said. And I think we can see all these connections, all these sides in each of the films we present. But secondly, another kind of process which I can see here is what I would kind of call the decolonizing of Soviet culture and Soviet experience in general. And while again, Soviet isn't Russian, so it is much more, and putting, the, Oscar winning Mikhalkov's film on the same, absolutely, you don't kind of have grades here, on the same level with less known to mass audience films of different Soviet republics. I think it's wonderful because you can see there's no levels there, there's no main film or less known film. It's wonderful, this horizontality of experience that you present, but also within this process of decolonizing this kind of Sovietness as a concept, I think we here in the kind of UK audiences or in general in the West, we're coming to understanding of, change of register of, academic or official vocabulary, because I know Ian probably knows we as academics, we have done all this, associations, large associations of Slavonic and East European language or something. But again, Armenian isn't Slavonic or Eastern European, neither is Georgian. But we discussed there quite a lot of, the new term that was around quite recently was this New East, which again included some Georgian and some Armenians, but this is not even, or even some, Kazakh films. So, and this is not even like East in a way that Poland is, which is kind of what was meant by the New East. So I think we're now in the center of this process of this change of register all over the world. Of course, this is like is connected to global processes such as decolonization and Black Lives Matter and this new ethics kind of ideas. But I think this is becoming more and more visible in kind of, again, academic sort of official circuit, and the way that this kind of cultural events are happening, which are so diverse, is a perfect sign of it. But also it forms the taste of the audience. I think we don't need to follow the taste here. We need to form them, and I think that's what both Armenian Institute and Kina Klassiki does brilliantly. And I had the pleasure to work with Kina Klassiki on their previous season, or penultimate, on Tashkent Film Encounters, where we showcased the films from Central Asia, and that was a delight. Again, and I didn't see those films, and I entered them to my curriculum, and I was so excited by the students' reaction to them and how they still could connect very this quite diverse identity and pick up some something that unites them. And actually something that unites is still film is still narrative still has characters, and that character still has kind of this atmosphere, and through that atmosphere, I think as an audience, as a film viewer, you'll be able to absorb the uniqueness, the unique language. I don't want to talk too much about that, because I think it's really wonderful that you give this agency to the audience. You just present them with these films. You don't call them, Armenian or Russian, or you just call it Under Soviet Skies, which again, I really celebrate this title. So yes, so that's probably answer, a short answer from me to your question. And I'm sorry, my light, it goes on off from time to time. I'll probably need to stand up in a second to turn it off.
Looks very dramatic suddenly, kind of descending.
That's my timer. My time is off.
But thank you for such a positive and joyful representation of the film. And I have to say, Under Soviet Sky came from discussions with Klassiki, and Talita, if I'm not mistaken, this was your suggestion, wasn't it? And because she loved A Piece of Sky so much, she wanted to do wordplay on this, because we wanted to have word Soviet, but then the sky, under sky, and I think Talita came up with this.
Well done. But I think interestingly, because A Piece of Sky in the Russian translation, I think, was called something different, like A Slap in the Face or something, which is again, presents some, this kind of background stories, can discover some tensions, but it's so good that actually, you don't write it anyway. I mean, this is probably in the program note, but when you look at it, I'm just really advocating for just having a look at the film and seeing what you can get out of there, from the language, from the emotions. And the emotions are completely, positive, and it's a piece of delight, this film. And you have Sofiko Ciaureli there, of course, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, she's incredible. We'll see a little clip of her coming up soon. And yes, the Russian translation is different, and it's based on a short story which is called Pale Blue Flowers, actually, originally. So it went through, but A Piece of Sky became quite a almost iconic name in Armenian history. And Ian, wanted to come back to you with a question, because we talk about current relevance, and of course we joked about poor Battleship Potemkin, but the impact of these films is still monumental and important. And we have the two oldest films we have are Hello, It's Me and Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors, if I'm not mistaken, 65 and 66 respectively. What's your view, how it has evolved since then?
Well, the problem, I mean, I winced when Eisenstein was mentioned earlier, because as I go around saying to people, you know, there's too much Eisenstein around. I say that having just produced yet another book on Eisenstein, which I co-edited with a Russian scholar, Julia Vassilieva. And so we're contributing to that mountain of books about Eisenstein. But really, I think what I feel, and I'll go back to the earlier period, is that I sometimes think that foreigners, people in Britain and in the Anglophone world, can only keep 2 or 3 Russian names in their head at one time. And in terms of cinema, the Eisenstein and Tarkovsky really loom much too large in people's minds. It's not that they're not great filmmakers. They were, but the problem is that they kind of blot out the landscape of all the lesser, really interesting filmmakers who are sort of just pushed aside because people can't remember the names. It really feels like that sometimes. And, you know, you've got in the program a film by one of the Shengalayas, Blue Mountains, for instance. Now, I've got very, very strong memories of Blue Mountains, and what an absolute joy and revelation it was. I showed that in a season of films at the, what was then called the National Film Theatre in the 80s, probably in 84 or 85. I viewed it, I think, in Moscow at Goskino. And of course, it's a classic Georgian comedy in the sense that it does something which Soviet cinema never did. And the Soviets that I knew, certainly around the Filmmakers Union and so forth, they loved, for instance, especially Georgian cinema, because it did something different. It brought a completely new quality, new kind of humor. All the Russian film people that I knew loved the humor and the kind of surrealism of Georgian cinema. And, you know, Blue Mountains is one of the great comedies. I mean, it's sort of, I don't know how to sum it up, but it's just got a kind of loopy, crazy, comedic take on the world, which Russians immediately saw as quintessentially Georgian. And they really valued that cultural difference enormously. And so did, of course, people outside. The Blue Mountains had a terrific international career. It was during that period when, yes, the Soviet film distribution apparatus could take films like that to a huge audience around the world, and it you know, got all sorts of awards. And the other interesting film that in the program, I think, which is worth drawing out, is Burnt by the Sun. And the reason I think Burnt by the Sun is so interesting is because the man who made it and who stars in it, Nikita Mikhalkov, has become a kind of, well, I would describe him as a monster of contemporary Russian cinema. I mean, he definitely looms too large. And he has had really a very sort of bad influence on the state of Soviet cinema, both with some of his own recent productions and just with his general influence. I mean, he's actually been a terrible influence. But it's important to remember that in the 1980s, Nikita Mikhalkov was one of the absolute stars of the new Soviet cinema. From the end of the 70s through into the 80s, he made a series of films which are extraordinary, some of which he both starred in and directed, some of them he just directed. But, you know, films like Rodnya, Kinfolk, Without Witnesses, the Unfinished Piece for Mechanical Piano. I showed that once to Michael Frayn when he was translating Chekhov, and he thought it was the best screen adaptation Chekhov he'd ever seen. And it is one of the very best. So Mikhalkov was once an extraordinary filmmaker. Something very sad happened to him in the post-Soviet era. It began, I think, in the Yeltsin era. But we must remember that he was once a very, very talented filmmaker, and we can't always, we shouldn't allow later sins to blot out those early glories. Burnt by the Sun is a terrific film. It was a very brave film, which actually gave us an insight into the dreadful political climate of the 1930s with great subtlety and real force. And again, it was a huge international success because we felt in the immediate post-Soviet era that we were just seeing a little bit of, you know, the the rug was being lifted to allow us to look in and see what life was like in those terrible times in the 1930s. So those are two films that I would pick out as being, really, they need to be remembered, they need to be celebrated, and anybody who goes to see them views them will have a real insight into the cultural climate, two aspects of the cultural climate. Well, I've got one little anecdote. I was about my visit to Soviet Armenia, which I think might amuse some of you. You remember Yuri Andropov, very short-lived Soviet leader? Andropov was only in power a short time, but he was determined to make his mark. And one of his big ideas was to root people out of the cinemas and stop them sneaking off during working hours to watch films, because the cinema attendance in the Soviet period was enormous. And people would cheerfully leave their offices, their work, and just go into the cinema and watch a film. When I was in Yerevan, I was taken to see a new cinema, brand new, beautiful cinema on the outskirts of Yerevan. And I overheard my KGB minder saying to the cinema director, "Has the Andropov directive had any effect on your attendances?" And the cinema manager said, "What do you think?" Of course it has. Because Andropov didn't last long. He was dead by next year. But that was one of his big ideas, to really do something about the fact that Russians just had this absolute fascination for cinema. And, let us remember that the Russian cinema had a vast domestic audience, truly vast domestic audience. And it, every studio during the Soviet era had in huge letters on the side of it. I remember seeing this in Yerevan. "Film is the most important art for us, V.I. Lenin." There it was in Armenian on the side of the studio. Every single studio had the official slogan, "Lenin said film was the most important art." And it really was the most important art during the Soviet era. And I'm afraid it's no longer as important in the post-Soviet era.
Great story about Andropov. We're glad he didn't stay there long. And thank you for your film recommendations.
Yep.
I have to confess, they'll be my two absolute favorites as well among these five. They're all amazing, but Burned by the Sun is just incredible. I choose to ignore Mikhalkov now, who is,
of course.
If you don't know, he's a huge Putin supporter now. I know he has a regular program on Russian TV. Right. And like we were discussing this with Nuritsa yesterday, and she said everyone has a price. So his price was 50 million for the sequel, I think. But he was wonderful and an incredible actor too. And I want to move to Nuritsa to talk about Parajanov and also Henrik Malian, A Piece of Sky, who you already mentioned, Ian. Before you start, Nuritsa, let's break up for 1 minute and watch the end scene, the very iconic end scene from A Piece of Sky with one of the most incredible soundtracks. Olivia, could you please play that? I don't think we have sound, Olivia. Could you try again, please? How beautiful. Even through tiny Zoom screen, it's just incredible. Actors and music and that last scene. Noritza, take us to the Parajanov land, which you love so much.
Yes, I probably would have spent my life in the Parajanov Museum if I could. And in fact, I tried to interview him in 1988, but by that time he was too ill, and he died the following year. I think really that Parajanov is one of the most sensationally neglected masters of cinema. His work has that power of ambiguity and lending itself to interpretation through different eras, almost like the Wagner opera. It's there among the great works of our civilization, I think. And I take the point of that Ian quite rightly made about Soviet cinema and how it supported and embraced all these different countries. But Parajanov was a dissident, and he paid the price for being a dissident, because he had to spend 8 years in jail, unable to make the films that he had written scenarios for. By the way, his scripts were always visual. They were like books of poetry with pictures on one side of each scene and each character, and then very little script, just a few words, like a poem. And I think what really is important is that he did do the necessary films at the VGIK where he was a student. But then when he got to Ukraine, and he was lucky enough to be given this commission for a film on the writer's book, Kostyubinsky's book. And the tool, really, the weapon, it seems to me, of Parajanov was collage. And like many Armenian artists, the condition of the Armenian artist is almost a permanent exile. He didn't speak Armenian, and yet he had this knowledge of his culture and his history. And he had to take on a Russian name. He was constantly struggling, I think, with his identity. And so what does he do? He smashes things up, as he did in his collages in the museum. Lots of little bits of things that are broken. And then he subverts them and he recreates another identity, another entity. And it's as though he wants to reform life, recreate what could be his homeland, his motherland. I found the same thing with Arshil Gorky when I was doing a book, that the identity was fragmented, and yet he brought it together in a semi-abstract fashion. And Parajanov also had that same ability to use something extremely concrete, physical, and yet use it abstractly, as he did in The Shadows of Our Forgotten Ancestors, where the camera is constantly in movement and the choreography is absolutely stunning. It's a whirlpool. You end up sitting on the edge of your chair. It's very interesting to see how, like Eisenstein as well, who wrote about it, that he sets up a big screen, a pan, a large image, and then he suddenly breaks it into a close-up which remains with you. You see that man holding the scythe. It's got painterly qualities and composition, and it's saying something. It's not just a beautiful picture. He is often criticized for being too painterly. But I think, on the contrary, that each of those images is saying something about the character. The plot is running forward. And it's like internal combustion, the contrast between these different ways of using the camera and the way we get drawn into an image and then pushed back makes the engine run forward. And the other thing which makes the engine run forward is the music, which is phenomenal. And it's not only music, but it's also physical sound, the sound of the water, the animals, the stone, the rock, and so forth. I was always very amazed at how he had such a great contrast between that film, which was probably made with better conditions and more money than Color of Pomegranates, which didn't have much of a budget. And so then that film becomes more static, and each frame becomes a painting. And there, at last, he comes to terms with his Armenian culture, which he has never done before. And he falls in love with it. And he makes this absolutely unbelievable film. And so much ambiguity in his work. It's like Shakespeare or music. It offers itself to new interpretations with each generation. And it's still there in its essence. He was looking for essence. He was looking for the essence of his life and his time. And so that ability to be able to create that in a poetic way, but also with humor and irony and character, to me, that is just irreplaceable. There's nobody else who makes films with that in that way. And I look at the huge influence he's had on other artists who try to imitate him or who want to pay reference to him. Somehow it just doesn't work. And yet he's able to do it, I think, because he has this inner, almost genetic love and understanding of history, of artifacts, of beautiful objects, which he thrusts and puts into his films and recreates. In Shadows of Our Forgotten Ancestors, which is based on these people called the Hutsul, some of whom are Armenian. They'd been driven there from Lvov. He actually invented the ritual of the couple being yoked together for the marriage. That wasn't something that was from that country, but he invented it, and gosh, it is convincing. It's very hard for me to stop talking about Parajanov. I absolutely adore his work. And again, I find that the fact that he had to go to prison because he was fighting for the rights of the artist, for the freedom of the artist to express himself. And when he was in Moscow, he sent in script after script, and they got rejected. He had to wait for months and months to get permission for something to be done or to be re-edited or reshaped. And I'm sorry, Ian, but I think for me, there isn't a balance. He suffered too much, and his films suffered too much. And we're lucky that at least that museum got built. His paintings and his collages were saved, and we can revisit at least the work of Parajanov in the museum. I haven't said anything about Toto Vance, who is one of my beloved writers. Again, someone who really understood the locality. When he writes in Armenian, he often uses idioms from a specific place, and this absolute humanity which comes through in that film. Lovely to see Chaureli again. I was lucky enough to meet her in Tbilisi. Again, a marvelous actress. And I was interested that the women in that film were actually driving the plot. They weren't pretty little ladies sitting around painting their nails like they were in the Georgian film. They were actually out there fighting. I just want to make one last comment of all these three films that I was struck also in Hello, It's Me, how actually he reversed what is usually the case, where the soldier goes to war and the fiancé stays at home pining and weeping. And the woman went to war. She was the one who was actually active, and he was waiting. The little girl was the one who was also driving things forward and finding him and pursuing him. So good for the Armenian directors, I think.
Thank you, Nuritsa. Thank you. I know. I think my colleagues just shared a link to Nuritsa's blog as well about Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors. It's an incredible film. It just grabs you very hard immediately. Not even grabs you, it hits you in the head by beauty and sense of pain and loss and detail. We wanted to share, we were choosing earlier which snippet to show. And the film started, and even the first minutes, with a lot of films, you wait for a build-up, then you get to the interesting parts to show. And this started, and after first second, we were like, right, This
Can
is
I
good.
give you a quote from him? He said about that film, I was attempting to build an expressive system originating directly from folk poetry and mythology. And the other thing he said, which I want to quote to you, is, I believe you have to be born a director. A director cannot be trained, not even in film school. Directing is basically the truth transformed into images: sorrow, hope, love, beauty.
How wonderfully put. Shall we watch the first minutes of Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors, please? Thank you.
Тікай, Іване! Тікай!
Олекса, пусти! Пусти! Братчику, пусти! Пусти! Пусти, братчику! Пусти!
I hope this intrigued everyone enough to go and watch it if you haven't watched it yet. And but oh, here's Gareth. Gareth, I know you when we talked first about the festival, you mentioned Burned by the Sun and being quite affected by it when you saw it first. Do you want to say a few words about it, and before we move on to the questions from the audience, just to show a few snippets from the other films as well?
Sure. Yeah. No. I love Burned by the Sun. I was ushering for it at the Arnold Feeney Cinema in Bristol. It was very, a great cinema that I had the chance to see. Pretty much all the films that they show for free, being an usher. And I remember, that indelible image of Stalin appearing over the field, as a kind of, a moment of the possibility of cinema, a bit like I said in my earlier comments, and absolutely agree with what Ian said. We mustn't forget, despite the monster that he has become, what a great filmmaker he has been. And I think again that idea of the lineage. I mean, it's interesting thinking about the wording of shadows of our forgotten ancestors. We are seeing, of course, in any film, shadows of our ancestors, but because of this initiative and others that you're involved in, they are not forgotten, and of course they need to be constantly celebrated. Like anything, we need to constantly remind ourselves and others of the work, of the past and its ongoing relevance. I'm just picking up on something Maria said earlier. When I was talking about tension, I didn't necessarily mean it in a negative sense. It was a creative tension, between these identities. Of course, there are examples, as Maritza has said, of course, in the Parajanov case, where those tensions were very, very destructive. But there are a lot of examples where I think that creative tension between different forms of identity and expression have made, many of these films, the works that they are. Navigations that, through a difficult system, of course, often do create, really remarkable outcomes in a way that so-called freedoms that we, nominally experience, in our territories, particularly alongside this period, do not generate, and the idea of of a relationship to finance and a commercial expectation, which was not necessarily the case, of course, across the Soviet cinema period, is a different kind of restriction, not one that necessarily, of course, leads to the terrible inhumanities that Parajanov experienced. But I think it is always this negotiation between different positions and perspectives, and you see that in individual films, and you see it in larger movements. I mean, I'm thinking just recently, of course, of the terrible situation in Nagorno-Karabakh, and how culture can inform us about the ground level stories of that experience without ever naming as such that territory. I think of the late Maria Sakian, who died far too young, in her wonderful film The Lighthouse, which is clearly about the inheritance of the earlier conflict in the 90s, but is put into a context and an understanding and a reading that can apply to any conflict situation that one might find oneself in, while at the same time sending very clear messages to Armenian audiences and Armenian fellow travelers, the experience of that, from that very particular perspective. So I think Soviet cinema, in the broader sense, Russian cinema and Republic cinema, give us this really distinctive relationship between personal and public histories, with this enhanced and heightened understanding of the tools and possibility of cinema, which makes it a privilege constantly to encounter, and the chance to do so on a platform like this, of course, is a great gift in these times, to remind us of what cinema can be at its richest and deepest, and to remember that it is not simply about the theatricalization on screen of an existing text, but actually that is the departure point, as Maritza said. Parajanov's scripts are poems, and they become filmic poems once they reach the screen. But the text on the page, minimal or maximal, is just the beginning of its inhabitation once it reaches the cinematic realm, and the full possibilities of cinema, I think, are what we're reminded of whenever we engage with this body of work.
Yeah, you've defined it so well, and the relevance to the film and with everything which is happening now in Armenia and around Karabakh. And of course, Burnt by the Sun has so much condensed conflict and tension in there, and told in such an unexpected angle. And what always amazes me in that film, while it's very, very heavy, serious, it's so much joy to watch. Mikhalkov's acting is a joy to watch, his little daughter who acts with him. And actually I struggled to pick a favorite bit to show, because I love every second in that film. I just adore it. And we picked probably the funniest bit, if we can share it, just for everyone to enjoy.
Прочь с дороги, девственница!
Вас кто приглашал?
Имя! Аттандер, гудяма, русский писец! Господи, на своих сумасшедших! Что вам здесь нужно? Молчите, многоженец! Как, что, в каком смысле? С праздником доброй твоей прабабушки!
Прабабушка, я еще не бабушка! Катя! Катя, кто-нибудь! Ой, вы... Ну что? Почему обязательно топать?
Ну почему? И ты здесь, любитель сладких вин! И не капризных дайте!
Позвать кого-то!
Ты! 34, 15, добавочный 19.
Что он сказал?
Это рабочий телефон на службе, кстати.
it's just wonderful. Makes me want to watch again. Maria, I know you also have a bit of a battery situation now, but before you suddenly disappear dramatically and cinematically, you mentioned that you recently watched Hello, It's Me and you loved it. If you were to sell it to people who haven't seen it yet, how would you introduce it?
Oh, that's probably difficult. I mean, to me, it's really a poetry, and it's a really like an example of maybe a new wave cinema. It's a really poetic, wonderful, tender, nuanced film. I just really, want to describe the experience and the feelings and the emotion that came after watching it, despite of the kind of narrative line, which is, again, to me, it was one of the probably the film that was most connected across to its neighbors, to again, Housekeeping or kind of Soviet new wave cinema, and the way these ideas of so-called intelligentsia and kind of long discussions of philosophy, love, life, fate, beautiful female roles as well as ever in this kind of type of cinema which I'm referring to, but also think the audience who don't have this relationship or reference of kind of Soviet so-called new wave or Thaw period films, I think French new wave, or actually Brazilian new wave. It's all kind of really beautifully done. Beautiful cinematography is also kind of colors. It's black and white, but it still has this wonderful balance of sadness and tension and love, and silences and interiors. So to me, it's a really beautiful film. Again, I managed to describe it without any spoilers. There is a background to it, and the program notes that Klassiki and Armenian Institute produce is absolutely wonderful. We'll give you a lot of background to that, but it's really a joy to watch and to experience. And I think it's also an example of slow cinema, when you kind of go into the emotions and feelings of the protagonists. So that would be kind of, again, my answer to that. But just to briefly reply to Gareth and to these ideas of tension, and again, of course, just something that came to mind. Of course, tension is always creative, because the conflict is the base of any narrative, and of course it creates kind of beautiful film. It's the tension in the film is a part of its dramaturgy, but I think, yes, it's absolutely all this film shows the creativity of directors and producers, but also I think here in this discussion we talk a little bit about the meta narrative of it, how all this film kind of creates new narratives, new drama, new tension within this small season. And I think that's the beauty of curating such local miniature seasons. So again, yeah, that's my answer. I'm not sure when I disappear, but my kind of battery says very soon. Sorry about that.
No, but thank you for such a beautiful description of Hello, It's Me. And I wanted to ask our audience if they have anything they want to share with our panelists, films they've already watched. If they have questions, comments, opinions, you want to present your little reviews. And while people are thinking, can we watch a little clip from Hello, It's Me, which was actually prepared by National Armenian Cinema Center, a beautiful, really slow moment. Maria, you will enjoy this.
Լսիր, կարող ես այնպես անել, որ սա դիտվի։ Փորձենք։
Levonce! Lave!
Savarnaki! Artyom! Они идут!
Thank you very much for sharing this. Such a poetic, beautiful scene. It just stays with you if you see it once, just lingers on in your mind. We want to hear which films our audience has seen or if they have questions. I know a few people who watched Hello, It's Me already or Burned by the Sun. And we have a question, a very specific question about this scene actually, about where it was filmed. Does anyone have any background on this? And you didn't travel with Dovlatyan in your travels in Armenia?
Muted.
You're mute, yeah.
Muted.
Yeah. No, but the locations in Hello, It's Me are just incredible, and you travel all over Soviet Union, and then in the end it sort of zooms down to a very Armenian location with a very, very concluding with a very Armenian scene.
I think in terms of locations, this particular scene is, I don't know if someone who's asking knows kind of Armenian landscape or doesn't know a Soviet kind of landscape at all. But for someone who doesn't, these were kind of the parks of attractions that were quite identical all across the cities of the Soviet Union. It's something that every child or again young adult would recognize, and they were quite. I mean, they were identical, some slight difference, and that's usually it's a very kind of cinematic locations. So, just talking about, I don't know where exactly this particular scene was filmed, but it's easy to imagine it to be filmed, in your local town if you're coming from that region, and that's quite remarkable. Something that may connect, the Soviet identities. Because through these locations and in a way there's a very famous Soviet kind of comedy, the Irony of Fate, which is based on this idea that all the this kind of houses at quite a lot of locations are completely identical across the Soviet Union, because there was when they're building your socialist state, everyone had equal similar conditions to live, and then that comedy, the kind of big kind of twist plot is that the person kind of gets drunk and wakes up in a different city, not recognizing, because there's same streets and same addresses everywhere. So that's again, this talking about something that unites the films. This kind of locations, of course, they're very specific, but at the same time, they're common to the all Soviet landscape. And this is again the beauty of it.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you. I think everyone now should go and watch the films and enjoy them. And just to conclude, I think let's watch that insanely surreal scene from Blue Mountains, which you loved so much. I've been saying it the previous conversation we had as well. It seems very Kafkaesque story for me, but much, much funnier and with the Georgian accent. So Let's watch that very surreal scene. I think it's a hilarious film. Please go and watch them. Thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you so much to all our panelists for sharing so many interesting stories and your insights. And Anushka, can we see Blue Mountains bit, please? That painting features prominently in the film, and it's very, very funny. Thanks again, and the festival will go until next Tuesday, so please watch it and write to us what you liked and what you thought. Thanks again. Thanks, Nuritza. Thanks, Ian. Maria has disappeared, and thanks, Garrett. Bye-bye.
In a puff of smoke. Bye.
Yes.
Bye.